Hi, this is Ruth Vanita. Nice to be with you virtually and wish I was there in person. So to start, I would say that in Hindu thought, all schools of Hindu thought, everything that exists is a manifestation of Atman, Brahman, self, spirit, God, whatever you want to call it. The degree of realization of divinity in each entity is different, but there is nothing which is outside of this. Those schools of thought which think that nature or matter and spirit are two separate and independent principles, like Sankhya, even in those schools of thought, everything has both principles, both matter, nature, and spirit. So Prakriti or nature or matter in Sanskrit is gendered feminine, and Purusha in Sanskrit is gendered masculine. But that is merely a convention. It doesn't female objects that are gendered female in society or beings that are gendered female. They also contain the Purusha principle, and those that are gendered masculine also contain the feminine principle, Prakriti. So nothing is aprakritik or outside of nature. This term aprakritik, which Baba Ramdev uses, is a translation of St. Paul and St. Augustine's idea of the unnatural, and that concept does not exist in ancient Hindu texts. I discuss all this more in my introduction to same-sex, the book Same-Sex Love in India, and also in my entry on Hinduism and sexuality in the Brill Encyclopedia of Hinduism. So even the demons, for example, in Hindu thought are not outside of nature. They are not eternally damned. They are also manifestations of divinity and can attain realization of that divinity. In the Hindu, the classical scheme of the goals of life, the Purusharthas, one of the goals of life is Kama, which means desire, all types of desire, including erotic desire, and Kama should be based on Dharma. So then we come to the question of what is Dharma. And there are two types of dharma. Nivritti dharma, which means the dharma which is aimed at liberation, and this is where every individual being, whether knowingly or unknowingly, is striving towards liberation or moksha. And the other type of dharma is pravritti or social dharma, pravritti dharma, where you fulfill your dharmas in society as a student, as a parent, as a child, as a neighbor, and so on. You have many aspects of that dharma. Now, when these two come into conflict with each other, which they do frequently, as in Arjuna's case in the Gita, when his pravritti dharma and his nivritti dharma seem to be in conflict, then it's a question of how to balance them. And when it comes to same-sex relationships or any kind of relationships which are seen as socially illicit, say intercaste, interreligious relationships, a frequent explanation of these relationships in ancient texts, as well as by modern day both lay persons and priests and scholars, which I have documented in my book Love's Right, which is on same-sex marriage, on the many female couples who since 1980 have been reported as running away and getting married or committing joint suicide together. So I studied those. And frequently people say, priests also who have married some of these couples say, that attachments from earlier lifetimes cause two beings to be attracted to one another, or to be attracted to anything. Any inexplicable attachment is explained in the ancient texts as due to an attachment from earlier lifetimes, and fighting against it will not really work because it will resurface again either in this lifetime or some other lifetime. So in fact it is those attachments which cause rebirth, and therefore one has to work through them in order to get beyond them. Of course, the purpose in the Purusharthas, the purpose is to get beyond all desire. But to get beyond all desire, you don't repress it, you work through it. And that is why renunciation is supposed to be towards the end of life, except for those beings who may have worked through it in earlier lifetimes and want to become ascetics in this lifetime, in which case they do not fulfill that social dharma of getting married and having children. So in Hindu thought and in Hindu society also, there have always been safety valves or ways out for beings who do not want to conform, who do not conform or are not able to conform to all the conventional ways of life like marriage and reproduction or following their parents' occupation, for example. In this context, one could look at the Kama Sutra, which actually is a Shastra also. And the Kama Sutra talks about the third Tritiya Prakriti, or the third nature. It is often mistranslated as the third sex, but it's actually the third nature. And talks about men who desire men as being of a third nature. It also, though very importantly, in the Kama Sutra, talks about two men who are not of the third nature, but are Nagariks. They are members of the city, citizens of the city, who, when they trust each other, can embrace each other or can unite with each other. And I've discussed that Sanskrit word in Love's Right, and I found that word in the text is used a majority of times to refer to unions of a marital kind. As far as sex acts are concerned, both the medical and legal texts, which deal not with love or not with attachment and not with unions, but only with certain acts, they do tend to pathologize them, and the legal texts sometimes prescribe a very mild penalty, and in other cases not even a mild penalty, just have a bath or something like that. So there is basically in Hindu tradition, same-sex relations have never been unspeakable until the late 19th century, and they have always been discussed in a range of registers, in a range of different types of texts, and there are many stories in texts about different types of relationships, and I have argued in my work that Hindu texts view a relationship positively, any kind of relationship, whether a filial or fraternal or heterosexual or what we would call heterosexual homosexual relationship, depending on whether it is selfish and it's only aimed at selfish desire, then it is viewed negatively. Whereas if it is aimed at the welfare not only of the two individuals involved, but of the community, the society, etc., then such a relationship is viewed positively. The example could be given from the 14th century Bengali Kritivas Ramayana of the two widows who have a divinely blessed sexual relationship. This is some versions of the Kritivas Ramayana, and they produce the child Bhagiratha who brings the Ganga down from heaven. That is just one example. Whereas on the other hand, many heterosexual love relationships which are merely aimed at selfish desire are viewed very negatively. So furthermore, I mentioned at the start that everything is a manifestation of divinity, and this is expressed in the way that gods and goddesses are conceptualized and worshipped. So even though gods, a dominant manifestation of a god may be male, like Shiva, or maybe female, like Parvati, yet the god also has feminine manifestations, and goddesses also have masculine manifestations, and not just across gender but across species, across object categories. For instance, when a god is praised by 1008 names in praise texts, like when Shiva is worshipped, or in the Gita when Krishna describes himself, Shri Krishna describes himself as the best among mountains, the best among rivers, the best among snakes, the best among trees, and so on. So Shiva is also worshipped as thou art male, thou art female, thou art neuter, and Vishnu, as we know, takes the form of Mohini. So Shiva, to please Parvati in the Padma Puran, takes a female form when he's sporting with her in the forest, and then everything in the forest takes a female form. This is in the Ramayana. So everything, in other words, gender is fluid, and this is also very clear because of rebirth. When you are born, you are not born necessarily in the same gender or with the same desires or the same caste or class or anything. So all these are appurtenances which are fluid. Okay, thank you. How many minutes?